We have a great program this morning. We have a guest in the studio. Tom Cirignano has written a fascinating book about his life owning a business, being a mechanic, and owning what do you call it? A filling station, Tom?
In a repair shop. Tom.
In South Boston.
That's right.
Met a lot of interesting people, a lot of nice people, maybe a few not so nice people.
Yeah, there were some interesting years there.
Thanks for joining me this morning.
Well, thanks for asking me to come in.
Go ahead. The name of the book is The Constant Outsider. How did you come up with that name for this particular book?
Well, I think because of the environments I've been in all my life, I've always kind of felt like an outsider. I've had to struggle to fit in. A lot of kids have had to face that problem. And so I had to learn the tools necessary. And I figured some of them were pretty exciting stories I had to tell, so I decided to
we'll
write
go
about
over a couple of those. We don't want to open up too much of the book. We want people to go out and buy it and read it because, for the parts I've read, the excerpts from it, and I've heard you were actually part of the Read More book special down at Read More Books with Eric Easterday. I think we had that, when was it? Earlier this year, May, June or something, and Tom was there.
Yeah, it was a hot day, I remember.
A book signing, an official book signing. Make you feel like special.
It was nice. There's a group of authors that I've gotten to know, and that's a lot of the good part about writing a book. You get to meet some really nice people.
Right.
But they have the book over at Read More. If anybody's in the area wants to go look at it.
Yeah. So The Constant Outsider is about you own this repair shop in South Boston. First of all, how did somebody with the name Cirignano end up in South Boston as opposed to the North? I'm not trying to stereotype you or anything, but...
Well, that's one of the reasons that I kind of felt like an outsider. It was generally an Irish working-class neighborhood. And I had been working there at the gas station since I was 7 or 8 years old, believe it or not. My dad would take me in there on Saturday morning with him. And during summer vacation, I spent a lot of summer vacations there working when... other kids were playing baseball.
So your dad owned the shop?
Yeah, he bought it in 1947.
All right.
And started it with just a little triangular office and a couple of fuel pumps. And over the years, he added 3 bays to the shop, and we had quite a large facility there. And,
is it still there today?
Yes, it is.
It is.
Yeah, they're no longer in the gasoline business, but they do repairs. So...
All right, so 1947, your dad opened this shop. It grew. Now, being a kid in South Boston, okay, what did you see? I mean, South Boston's a unique area.
Yeah.
South Boston is not like Rainham, Massachusetts.
No, it isn't.
Okay,
in fact, I was born and brought up in Dorchester. But what I found out, I thought the kids in Dorchester were tough. When I started seeing the things that went on in the streets in South Boston, I tell you, it was kind of scary, and it made the Dorchester kids look like Boy Scouts compared to what I saw in South Boston.
Because being from this area, I never, I actually lived in Boston for 1 year, a couple of years while I was going to school, but you heard places like Dorchester, Mission Hill, etc., which are supposedly the real tough places. But then you read about some of the criminal elements that get into places like South Boston, East Boston, the North End, etc., and you say, it's just a different culture.
It is. In fact, you become part of that culture when you're exposed to it on a daily basis. The difference between living in South Boston and working elsewhere is when you're in a gas station, you're pretty much on the street all day long.
Right.
You get to see everything that goes on in the neighborhood, all the activity. Nothing gets by, when you're on the street. And I've got to meet a lot of the characters and players of the time. A lot of them were enforcers for the mob. Bookies were... A lot of bookies were my close friends because these are the people I got to know. Drug dealers were pretty much doing open trade on the streets during those years.
So some things haven't changed.
No, I think it's changed a lot. In South Boston, it's a totally different area now. It's turned into an area that's very desirable. In fact, one thing I'd like to point out is I see a lot of similarities between what's going on in New Bedford now to what went on in South Boston back in the 80s. There was shootings almost on a daily basis. I mean, I'd come to work and find out a friend of mine, had been shot the day before. And I read about this stuff in New Bedford, and it seems like it's just a mirror situation I don't know what they did to turn the situation around in South Boston, but I think law enforcement should study it. And it's almost like they cut the head of the snake off, and then things got better when Whitey Bulger was kicked out of town.
Right.
You know.
So you were growing up in South Boston, okay? At your dad's shop there, spent a lot of time. What are some of the things you saw as a kid there that still stick in your memory?
Well, one thing that always stuck in my mind was there was this young boy about the same age as I was that lived right across the street from the gas station. And, of course, I was like an outsider in the area. I was the kid in the old hand-me-down coveralls that was working. And the kids in the neighborhood didn't really have anything to do with me. But anyway, this one kid, I saw him get brutally beaten on the sidewalk one morning. I mean, the guy walked up to him and just hauled off and knocked him out cold right on the street. And then when he was down on the street, he wound up and booted him with a steel work boot as hard as he could, right in the face. And it sounded like a football leaving for a field goal. It was an awful sound that it made. And here's a guy that's already unconscious on the ground. I mean, I had never seen anything like that in Dorchester. But in Southie, this was like, if you went down in a fight, you could pretty much count on getting kicked in the face.
Yeah.
And that was a memory that stuck with me. And the sad thing about that particular guy, you know, we were familiar with each other during the years growing up. And as the years went by, we kind of just said hi on the street. This is an interesting story. After all those years, we're grown-ups now. He walks by the gas pumps one day and he asked me, we've known each other for years. We've never had a beer. He says, why don't we meet, down at the Ocean Kai down on the west side of Southie for a beer tonight? I says, fine. I get out. I'll be up there about 5:30. I had a customer come in at the last minute, and he had to get back to the suburbs over the weekend, so I couldn't just turn him away. So I ended up working on his car. I was late from my meeting. Well, that was a Friday night. I had no way. We didn't have cell phones back then. I couldn't call the guy and say, look, I want to be late. I can't meet you in the parking lot at 5 o'clock like we planned. Well, the next morning, there were 2 detectives waiting for me at the front door of my gas station when I opened up. I knew they were in suits. They had a blue Chevy Impala parked there, and, I knew they were cops.
What gave it away, right?
Yeah. And they said, are you Tom Cirignano? I said, yeah. Why? He says, were you supposed to meet somebody at the Ocean Kai last night at 5 o'clock? And I says, yeah, but why? What do you want? And they showed me a picture of this guy that I was going to meet, and his eyes were all black and blue and closed, and his face was all swollen. I said, oh, my God, yeah, I was supposed to meet Joe last night. What happened? Did he get beat up? And they said, no, he's dead. Somebody put a gun in the window while he was waiting for me in the car in the parking lot and shot him behind the ear.
Ooh.
I would have been sitting with him if I had made my appointment, because, those were the days when people were still maybe smoking a joint here and there. Right. And, I was young.
But that was,
we probably would have been out in the parking lot together, and that was a scary situation.
And how old were you when this
I was in my 20s.
In your 20s?
Yeah. I was in my 20s when that happened.
So still young enough to really have an influence on you.
Yeah, but apparently he had told people at the restaurant, I'm outside waiting for my friend Tom from Emerson Auto. And that's why the cops got word that I was supposed to be there, apparently. So they questioned me on that shooting.
Did they ever solve that shooting?
No.
Was it a gangland type hit?
I came to find out...
How was this Tom? Was he connected in
Joe,
some
his
way?
name was.
Joe, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Joe.
Actually, I didn't know what he was into. But apparently the word on the street, and this is where you got all your news, because nobody called the cops in those days. It was all, it was sort of like it is in New Bedford now. It's like the code of silence. It's a deadly code. What was I trying to say? I lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. So a local, actually, I found out this guy was an enforcer later on in life, came to me and he says, yeah, he says, I found out what happened to Joe. And I says, what was it? He says, he was dealing cocaine out of that restaurant without paying tribute to the gang on the west side of Southie. We all knew who ran that gang.
Right.
So he refused to pay tribute, and that's how they solved his problem. So
And that was a Winter Hill gang, I assume, right?
yeah, well, they
Whitey.
Yeah, Whitey and his guys.
Yeah.
I'm sure that they were the ones because they controlled everything on the west side at least.
Now, when did they get involved in actually